welcome back. The Democrats had the first shot at the new surreality of the political convention. Tomorrow it begins for the Republicans. So let's talk about it with a group from the Grand Ole Party. Very good to have with us, as you see there in the lower left hand of the quadrant, Tori Sachs from Michigan Rising Action. Above her, Sandy Barua, the head of the Detroit Regional Chamber. To his right, Dennis Cowan, back with us, the former mayor of Royal Oak, and very good to have with us the congressman from Michigan's 7th District, Republican Tim Walberg. And Congressman, I'd like to start with you, if I could. We'll get to the convention in a minute, but coming off of my conversation with Dana Nessel, I'm curious about your thoughts on what we've been watching at the Postal Service. We saw the Postmaster General undergoing a pretty good grilling on Friday in front of a Senate committee, and he'll move to a House committee tomorrow. What are your thoughts about what we've been watching take shape in the Post Office?
Well, first and foremost, and it's great to be with you. First and foremost, this is just another in a long string of efforts to discredit the work of our president and the administration. They couldn't get it on Russia, couldn't get it on Mueller, couldn't get it on Ukraine, couldn't get it on impeachment. COVID, they've had a hard time defining that was produced by Donald Trump, and the type of effort he put toward it with science and with medical professionals, the top in the land, doing what we're doing, we're learning as we go, but nonetheless, it was a great job. So now we're trying to discredit, I believe, the victory of Donald Trump in the end by trying to portray that he had done something to hurt the Postal Service. Stop and think about it. The Postmaster General was not appointed by President Trump. It was appointed by the board that had responsibility for it. Congress in the CARES Act added $10 billion of a money. $1 billion cash on hand that'll take them into 2021. The post office right now is dealing with the amount of mail that they dealt with in 1977. There are efficiencies that are needed. There are efficiencies that we can put in place. But this Postmaster General has made it very clear we're doing no more efficiency production until after the election. So we can do it. The Postal Service will be there, but I'm encouraging people to go to the polls. And if you're doing absentee ballot, then go to the clerk's office, get the absentee ballot, fill it out, turn it in right there, and you know it's taken place. We saw what took place in the last election primary in Detroit. That's a challenge that we see about trying to push people to not do what I think we can safely do. And that's go to the polls and vote for your candidate. Mark it as an opportunity. You don't have to stick your thumb in a bowl of purple dye or purple ink, but you are a privileged citizen. Get it done, and it will work well. And let's see what happens in November.
Let's move ahead, if we could, then to the convention and what needs to be done there. Tori, after what you watched this past week, it is an unusual and weird situation to try to do all this without the usual crowds. And I would suggest that I suppose that the teleprompter is a better friend to Joe Biden than it is to Donald Trump, who really does thrive on being able to speak off the cuff and being able to feed off a reaction from the crowd. How does he now duplicate that this coming week?
I mean, I think President Trump has a lot of good things he can talk about. He can talk about better trade deals like the USMCA that's really helping Michigan right now, Michigan's business. We needed that years ago, and now with where the economy's at, we really are going to need it. So I think he has great things to talk about, lowering taxes, you know, the defeat of ISIS, being tough on China. Joe Biden may have given a decent speech from a teleprompter, but he won't talk to media. He won't, go and talk to people in general, and he's not going to have a teleprompter for the debates. So I think you'll see Donald Trump and the Republican Party really highlighting what they've done the last 4 years and laying out a vision for what the next 4 years and really getting our economy back to where it was at the beginning of this year, and knowing that they can do that.
There are those who've suggested, Dennis, that really the art here is going to be moving this onto anything other than the pandemic. The response to the pandemic, by almost any measure, hasn't been very good. We lead the world in the poor response, I guess, to it, given the deaths and the cases. So how do you now keep that from being the elephant in the room?
Well, first on the pandemic, that's a shared responsibility, not only of the federal government, but of all the state governments. So we can save that discussion for another day. In watching the Democrat convention, first I was struck that being the party of Hollywood, they couldn't even put on a good show that was entertaining for 2 hours to keep the ratings up. Secondly, Biden talked so much about darkness and light. I thought it was going to be dialogue from Star Wars movie that I saw recently. So I think Trump's got a lot more. It'll be a much more optimistic convention and discussion about the future of America, about what he's done for working families, the tax cuts, the additional money for unemployment compensation, and the $3,400 check that he has said is going to be sending to families. So I think it's going to be a much more optimistic. I thought it was a very down convention for the Democrats, and quite frankly, they needed the traditional convention with all the hoopla because they have an enthusiasm problem for the Biden-Kamala Harris ticket.
But Dennis, isn't that the way it worked in reverse the last time around? It was the Republicans who were so despondent over the current administration that that's what they ran against.
Well, I'm not sure what they're running against, although we do know that they mentioned Trump more in their convention speeches than they did Joe Biden.
Well, of course, because
the enthusiasm gap is going to be because nobody wants to talk about policy. Nobody wants to talk about fighting China. Nobody wants to talk about Iran being kept in check. And that's because Joe and President Obama gave Iran $6 billion to spend in terrorism around the world. So I think it's going to be easy to combat type of things that the Democrats are going to put forward in this Republican convention.
Let me bring Sandy in. I would suggest, though, Dennis, that most second-term presidential elections are a referendum on the current administration, so you do end up talking about them more than you do yourself, I suppose. But Sandy, you have been rather famously one of the Republicans that the Democrats featured this past week. You have not really enjoyed these 3.5 years, and the reason I wanted to include you is whether or not there's anything that the Republican Party can do to bring you back into the fold this week. What do you want to hear?
Yeah, there's a small group of us. We meet in a phone booth of loyal, longtime Republicans who have some real questions about how this particular administration has handled their responsibilities. You know, I think, listen, if I were advising, the Republicans in the Trump campaign, and I think they're doing this, they need to do two things primarily. Number one, they need to rebuild trust with suburban educated voters. These are the voters that went to the polls 3.5 years ago, had real questions about the Clintons and Hillary Clinton, and decided to take a flyer on Donald Trump. And he's lost a lot of those people. Now, not all of them, but he's lost a lot of them that might make a difference in states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and others. And the other thing that they need to do, and this is what, frankly, Donald Trump and the Trump campaign is really, really great at, is bringing out the fear, bringing out the kind of the negative side, as Dennis was referring to, and that will have the effect of suppressing the vote on the other side. And that, frankly, is a tried and true campaign tactic. Both sides have used that over the years. I just don't think we've seen any campaign use it to the art form and elevate it to the art forms of the Trump campaign.
Congressman Wahlberg, what do you do with that perception that there seems to exist, at least in the popular imagination, that Republicans want fewer people to vote, to suppress the more people stay home, the better it is for Republicans?
That's not us. In fact, that's why we're encouraging people to get out and vote. We're talking about the greatness of America in our convention. We're talking about something far different. And Sandy, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but the people you represent have experienced untold benefit from this administration's policy. If you want to wrap yourself around personality, wait till you see Kamala Harris. If you want to wrap yourself around policy, we have an economy up till March that will continue to grow even now because of the principles we put in place. Deregulation of unnecessary regulations. Reduction of taxes that didn't simply go to the wealthy. It went to the bottom line to employ people. Michigan benefited from that in manufacturing. What we heard in the convention this week from Democrats was their mantra, which ends up being to fund police and other things, dismantle our civil society, destroy our economy with policies that we've seen destroy the country. Whereas the Republicans, we're talking about renewing the American dream, restoring the way of life, rebuilding the greatest economy ever. And if that doesn't get through to the educated, and I guess I don't represent a bunch of educated people because I have a lot of rural people in my district, but they're awful smart. And they're going to go for the same things, I think, in the end, that the suburban so-called educated people are going to ultimately say, I can get past personality, when we've now seen the evidence that it's only this administration that brings us forward.
Tori, I've only got like about 20 seconds left. Are you worried? I know we've learned from the last time around, don't put too much faith in the polls, but are you worried right now that the president is lagging so far?
No, I've seen polls as close as 3 and 4% this week for both President Trump and John James going into the final 2 or 3 months of this race. Michigan's in play, and people are smart enough to talk about educated voters. Voters are educated enough to know that Joe Biden's been in politics for 47 years. If he was going to do something substantial, he would have done it by now. Donald Trump created the best economy we've had, and he'll do it again. And I think that's what people are going to focus on.
Well, you've helped make the case for the GOP. We'll watch them do the rest as we head into this next week. Gang, thank you all very much for being with me today.
Thank you.
Stay safe. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more Flashpoint right after this.